Atheism plus what? What do I mean by that? First I have to give you some background ideas. A certain concept that I think that people overlook, even though it's quite obvious, is that atheism is now a community. It's not just, if you're an atheist, you're not just an atheist. If you're a part of this community, of the organized atheist community, if you're the sort of person who comes to conferences and so forth, you're part of an actual community. It's not just a bunch of isolated atheists anymore. And we know this, obviously, because we have the new atheism movement. Notice there wasn't a big, famous new humanism movement, for example. It's atheism that's taking a lead in public and getting public recognition and becoming the biggest identity movement. Lots of people identify as different things, humanist, skeptic, and so on. But the biggest one, the one that's growing, it seems, the most, is the identity of being an atheist. Atheists are also recognized as a constituency in the media. You find that media, journalists and so forth might have no idea what the skepticism community is or the humanism community, but they know there's an atheist community and they'll use the term atheist. It's recognized as a community that they can talk about and write about. And obviously we have numerous national, regional, and local organizations, tons and tons, hundreds and hundreds of local organizations, campus groups, community groups, that identify as atheists as part of their identity and role. And of course, obviously, as we're here, we have conferences, meetups, and social societies all across the country and beyond, where we gather socially as atheists and identify as atheists. So this is definitely a community. And we have our own periodicals, and most importantly, online networks. Our biggest presence is definitely online, where there really is an atheist community in a large scope. Now, communities in general have responsibilities. If you're part of a community, communities have a voice, for example. You can speak, the atheist community, the reporters will come and ask, what does the atheist community think on this subject or that subject? So the question is, are we going to use the voice we have responsibly? Communities also have resources. We have money, we have manpower, we have online networks, we have communication networks, and many other aspects, resources that we can deploy. Will we deploy those resources, use those resources responsibly? And that includes information networks and action networks. And communities, as a community, will be judged by people outside that community. So will we ensure as a community that we're being judged accurately? And how do we want to be perceived as a community? These are questions we have to ask. And also as a community, through our information networks, through our organizations, through just our own communication, communities can influence their own members. So the question is, will we do that for the better or for the worse? Now, our community has goals. Obviously, one of those big goals that's been talked about today already is to increase the number of atheists. Hopefully, that means increasing the number of morally responsible atheists. I think that should be part of our goal as well. And also to protect the rights of atheists, the interests of atheists, the welfare of atheists. There we go. And that includes not just by enforcing church-state separation, and in fact several examples of that have been brought up today in their various speeches of different ways that atheist organizations are helping atheists and looking after the rights and interests of atheists. And then of course atheist organizations and the atheist community as a whole, one of its goals is to serve the needs of atheists, and these needs include knowledge interests. As a community we have knowledge interests and social needs. And I'll talk a bit more about that as we go along. Now, to give you an example of what I mean about the atheism community, I have to tell you a story. Many of you probably already know this story. I happen to know some of you might not know this story, so I'm going to tell it. A year ago or two, there was a 15-year-old atheist girl whose very religious mother gave her a copy of the Carl Sagan's Demon-Haunted World. And she went online and was so happy about this. She put her picture online and told the story. Isn't this great? My mom understands me. She got me this book, even though she was very religious, and she knows I'm not. And so this was should have been a really great story. But unfortunately, this was on an atheist thread on Reddit. Reddit is rather infamous, but nonetheless, in this atheist forum, very quickly, the comments devolved into a long string of jokes between several atheists about raping her, essentially. Often in graphic terms. It's pretty disturbing if you read it. Now, it was worse than that. I mean, there's a lot of other sexist and demeaning remarks being thrown at this woman, this girl, by the atheists on this thread. But worse than that is that hundreds of atheists were thumbing up these remarks. More, in fact, originally, very early on, there were hundreds more thumbing them up than thumbing them down. And there, like I said, there's a lot of other sexist and belittling commentary as well. Now, this isn't an isolated incident. One of the women who wrote about this particular thing is Rebecca Watson. You may know that she's the target of this kind of thing a lot as well. And she's not alone. I'll talk about others in a moment. She was one of the earliest to write about all this, and she's not even close to the only target. The harassment that her and other leading atheist women in the movement have received online includes rape threats, joking about raping them or wishing they'd get raped, persistent jokes and insults about their appearance, calling them bitches and cunts and worse things. One of them, for example, had their blog comments bombarded by a handful of atheists exchanging dozens of comments graphically describing her giving them a blowjob. Another was sent to pornographic drawings of her having been tied up and raped and jizzed on, to give you an idea. And those are just examples. This has, in fact, evolved into a constant pattern of intensified harassment of prominent atheist women by other atheists, mostly but not exclusively men. They actually are getting far more harassment, these women are getting far more harassment and abuse from atheists currently than from Christians or Muslims or other religious believers. And when I discovered this myself, I was extremely shocked and appalled. And this included stalking behavior in some of the cases of these women, sustained sexual harassment, following them everywhere online, digging through their past online histories to find things to make fun of or to invent new reasons to attack them with, repeatedly sending them hate mail, often with sexually harassing remarks or images, or repeatedly filling their blog and YouTube comments with those things, and then they have the audacity to complain when these women close their comments feature. Now, it appears dozens, if not hundreds, of atheists have been engaging in this behavior, targeting any woman who complains about it, especially, or even who just discusses feminism in any substantial way. And the women who have been targeted by this harassment campaign include not just Watson, but Surly Amy, Stephanie Svan, Greta Christina, Ophelia Benson, Jen McCrae, and Amanda Marcotte, and that's just the short list. So when I'm talking about atheist community and Atheism Plus, what I have in mind here is the first thing I mean by plus is Atheism Plus basic moral values. Atheists should not be doing this. Atheists should not be tolerating this in our community. As a community, we should be speaking up against this and disapproving it. It gets a little worse, though, I'm sorry. When I first blogged about this, and I was not the first to blog about the Atheism Plus movement, not by a long shot, but when I first blogged about it, my first blog entry, I basically quite stridently denounced all this sexual harassment in no compromising terms. I argued for greater humanitarian concern from atheists, and I advocated that we adopt at least 3 basic moral values. And I spelled them out, I explained them in detail, and those were compassion, integrity, and reasonableness. And no sooner had I done this than I was accused of being Hitler, Stalin, and I was accused of starting a religious cult and various other things shouted at me. So before I continue with the rest of this talk, let me just get one thing clear, just get this out of the way. Things that do not make you Hitler, Stalin, a cultist, or a religionist. The obvious, calling men who engage in overt sexual harassment douchebags and assholes, not on that list. Arguing for greater humanitarian concern from atheists doesn't make you Hitler, sorry. Asking people to be compassionate, honest, and reasonable doesn't make that list. Disowning people who declare their refusal to be compassionate, honest, or reasonable. I mean, if they stalwartly say, we reject your moral values, I'm going to disown those people and I'm going to say so. That does not make me a religionist or a cultist or anything like that. It doesn't make me divisive either. It means that I'm trying to promote humanist values, and that's kind of the point of what I'm going to talk about. But first of all, again, Atheism Plus is a thing. We got to get that across. Oops. The term was first promoted by Jennifer McCreight based on an idea from one of her readers to describe a movement that had been growing within New Atheism over the last 5 years. In fact, the movement existed before it was named. This movement was for promoting moral values more in the atheist movement and the discussion of societal problems among atheists more than we already do, and for making the atheist community more welcoming of and responsive to women and minorities. And this was the basic idea of it. So when we're talking about Atheism Plus, we mean not just, we're talking about that we should be, if we're going to be an atheist community, we should be not just atheists, but we should be atheists plus all of this. When Jen did her blog, I quoted it. And this is a quotation from my blog of her blog. She gave a list of, these are the kinds of things we're talking about. We're going to be atheists plus we care about social justice. We're going to be atheists plus we support women's rights. We're going to be atheists plus we protest racism. Atheists plus we fight homophobia and transphobia. Atheists plus we use critical thinking and skepticism on all subjects. Now the naysayers, of course, have accused her and others of making this the complete list. This is not the complete list of all the things that we're talking about or advocating. This is just a list of what should be the clear and obvious no-brainers. So that's the basic idea of it, but it can be broken down in a different way. In reality, what we're talking about is atheism plus humanism plus skepticism. Now there are actually 3 separate communities, and they exist, and there's a lot of overlap between them, obviously. There's the atheist community, the humanist community, and the skeptic community. We want to merge the ideals of all these communities within the atheist movement itself. We want the atheist community to basically be this: atheism plus humanism plus skepticism. Now it starts with atheism because we're atheists and we're within the atheist movement, and atheism is the largest outspoken identity movement of all of these groups. But that doesn't mean, for example, if we define agnostic, for example, as someone who's an uncertain atheist, they're not sure yet if they're an atheist or if they're going to commit to atheism or how atheistic they are, they're welcome in the movement. And there's different ways you can define atheism. One is the sort of clinical definition: if you don't have a belief in God, you're an atheist, and by that definition, agnostics are atheists. But as an identity label, as something that you call yourself, you may want to say you're an agnostic to indicate that you don't have the certainty that God doesn't exist that maybe other atheists do. So as an identity label, atheism can mean a different thing. And when I go through the rest of this talk, I'm going to mean atheism as an identity label, but also in that clinical sense of all non-believers who join and work with us in the same common community. Humanism is a basic idea. We're talking about adopting some, or all, if not all, of the moral and social goals of humanism. This should not be controversial, and yet it has been. And skepticism. This is important. Skepticism as a movement has its own set of values and methods that they're applying to ideas in different domains. We want to grab those values and methods and apply them to all domains and make that a part of atheism as a movement. So that includes, therefore, the critical commitments and interests of modern skepticism, the modern skepticism movement. Now, Atheism Plus is already a thing. Atheism Plus, as I just described it, everything I've just told you, is and was and has been already a growing and active movement within New Atheism overall. Someone just gave it a name. I mean, that's all that really happened. It existed already. It was already influencing organizations and the community. Someone just realized that, oh, all these people have some common shared values and goals, and they named it. And that's when all hell broke loose. But anyway. Another point, not everyone furthering its goals adopts the specific label of Atheism Plus, nor need they. There's no requirement for this. And to give you an example, Atheism Plus is just a clinical name for a movement that exists. It's like saying that you're a Homo sapiens sapiens, that's your species. But that doesn't mean you have to go around constantly saying, talking about Homo sapiens sapiens, identifying as Homo sapiens sapiens. You can call yourself a person, a human, a man, a woman. What word you use doesn't matter. You still are clinically defined as Homo sapiens sapiens, but it doesn't matter what label you use. We understand what you're talking about. So Atheism Plus is just that clinical name for the movement, the values and ideals that exist. We don't require anyone to adopt the name of this. And again, institutions. We have many different institutions within our movement. They can pursue, certainly, their own narrower goals, their own specific mission goals, while still embracing Atheism Plus as a laudable set of goals within the wider atheist community that they serve. And that's the basic vision that we have in mind. Now remember I said earlier about communities having responsibilities. Number one, to give you an example, Christians, you know this, all of you know this, Christians claim atheists have no morals. So do you disagree with that? I'm assuming you do disagree with that. Then stand up for and act on your values. Defend them. Actually act on them in the way you treat your fellow atheists, as well as the lip service you give to those values when you're debating Christians. Embody the values that you believe in. Explain them and defend them. Number two, we can use our resources, all of those resources, our manpower and our communication networks, some of our money perhaps, to make the atheist community better informed and more active on social issues, and not just in science, philosophy, and religion. And I'm going to explain exactly some examples of what I mean in that respect as we get along. And also, let's accept and encourage constructive criticism of each other within the movement, and use it to better ourselves and the community and its institutions. We have to be ready to accept that and to make good use of it, and not be talking about we can't criticize each other. That's not going to be helpful for progress within the movement. So to go back to the first of these, the main point here as a community, as a representative, as someone who's representing the atheist community, as someone who's a member of the atheist community, don't let bad atheists represent you. Don't let them think they do by your silence either. That's the kind of thing we want. We want more proactive atheists representing and speaking out for their values and pointing out which atheists don't represent them. In regard to the second one, show the world that the atheist community is not tone deaf to major issues in the world. Christians can talk about how they care about poverty and all these other issues. Do atheists care about those things? Does that make them better people than us? Or in reality, and I think in reality most of the people here do care about those things as much as Christians do. And as atheists, you should be seen as caring about those things as atheists, as an atheist community, the same way the Christians do, because that's how Christians promote their own image. We can promote our own image the same way, and we had better do so. And finally, we need to heed the difference between harassment and this gratuitous verbal abuse and criticism. First of all, obviously, we should be making that distinction, but whenever you see people making a false equivalency between these, saying that these are the same thing, you should call them out for that and point out, no, they're not the same thing at all. So back to that idea of the community, that our community has goals. I mean, one of those, of course, is to increase the number of atheists, and here I'm saying preferably those should be morally responsible atheists. And so that should be a part of our idea of how to achieve our goals. That should be a component of what we're thinking about, not just increasing the number of atheists as if their moral values and the things that they care about are irrelevant. And then, of course, to protect the rights of atheists. And that includes the right to be free of harassment online and off. And that doesn't necessarily mean political rights. There are also moral rights as well. Moral rights that we can stand up and defend socially as a community. And then to serve the needs of atheists, including knowledge interests and social needs. And I'll talk about these each in turn. And as I talk about this, I'm going to be talking about what organizations can do, but I have to tell you, this movement has been around for years. We've been working on it, and we've been influencing and talking to organizations all across the country, locally and nationally. And many organizations have already been responsive to a lot of our ideas. And I have to say, American Atheists is really on the forefront of being responsive to these ideas. And I'll give you some examples as we go along. But when I talk about organizations, I have in mind all organizations. So if there are people here who are members of other organizations, local organizations, campus groups, other national organizations besides American Atheists, heed what I'm talking about. And all of you, there are many of you here who are going to be future leaders of the movement. Because I see this trend of people accepting these ideas and values and promoting them within organizations, and I want that to continue. And the only way to get that to continue is if you, future leaders in the audience now, also believe in what we're talking about and understand what we're talking about and can promote them and keep the ball rolling forward when you finally come into control and influence within these organizations. Now, I mentioned the fact that we're working on increasing the number of atheists. We saw a talk earlier showing that looks like we're doing, American Atheists especially, doing a pretty good job at this. Certainly it's significant. They're having an effect. But we also, I think atheist organizations need to focus on the second bit a little bit more, this idea of promoting socially responsible, morally responsible atheism. And when we're talking about protecting the rights of atheists in terms of the legal sphere, certainly with separation of church and state and so on, atheist organizations are already doing this very well. They could use more money and resources to do it better, but they already have the idea of how to solve these problems in mind. They have good plans for it. But they might not be doing the second thing quite as well, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. And I think, I'll give you an example later. However, some organizations have been stepping up and starting to do this. I think we could do more, and I think more organizations could get involved in that. So when we get to serving the needs of atheists, I'm going to talk about two completely different types of interest here. One is, what are we doing to make the atheist community better informed about the problems of the world? When you get a captive audience like this, of like-minded people, atheists, we can actually use that as an opportunity to educate you and make you better informed and make atheists better informed as a community to do the things they want to do. And there's lots of different ways we can do this, and I'll give some examples later. But there's another side of this too, which is, what are we doing to meet the social needs of atheists? And this is something that we also had been promoting over the years and has been increasingly successful, especially mostly with local organizations, but national organizations are starting to get involved in it as well. To give you an example, is our SIGs, special interest groups, where you have, for example, I've been to several large atheist local groups where they have their monthly meeting, everybody comes to the monthly meeting and they do their things together as a group, but then they also break off into separate special interest groups. There's a bowling group, there's a gay rights activism group, there's an animal rights activism group, there's a knitting group, there's a book club group, there's a parenting and sharing daycare group. So they have these special interest groups, and you just join the special interest group that interests you, and that group will be supported by the larger community in terms of financial and organizational stuff, and then you can have the different groups serving different interests within the field. And a lot of this can include fun stuff, obviously, like drinking parties and things of that nature. Roller skating parties, I think we could have more of those. I think we should have an atheist bowling club in every major city in the country. I think that would be awesome. So we like to see these things as well. And so this is the other side of the coin in terms of serving atheist needs. So get back to that first goal, increasing the number of atheists. This is something that we've also been talking about, and again, there has been a good response to this from several organizations. It's been increasing visibly in just the past year and a half, which is obviously focusing on education and science, reason, and skepticism. That's important in a lot of ways, and I'll talk about ways you might not have thought about how that's important. But if you want to make atheists, that's one of the first things you've got to do. I mean, that besides getting people to read the Bible. Those are like the top two. But the other is broadening the appeal of atheist organizations and atheist events and so forth to women and minorities. And that's been improving lately. And one way to do that, of course, actually probably the chief way to do that, if not the only way it can be done, is to start giving them leadership roles, be responsive to their concerns, and treat them well when they show up. It's kind of obvious things. These were issues that we were talking about, like 3 or 4 years ago. There's been a lot of improvement on this, a lot of understanding of this goal. But this has been a part of what Atheism Plus has been trying to advocate. Now, to give you an example, if you want more black atheists in your membership of your organization, then you have to show that you actually care about their concerns. To give you an example of some concerns I've heard from black atheists is that local black atheist communities are very interested in their main issues that they're struggling with are not creationism in schools. They're more concerned with inner city poverty and prison reform, for example. That's not the whole list, but that's an example of these things that are very seriously important to their community. And so we might want to at least give some ear to this and think about what if there's anything that we can do to help them deal with these issues. And that just brings out the whole general concept that you should actually ask women, as organizations, local organizations, and national organizations, actually ask women and minorities, a lot of them, not just a few of them, what would get them to attend your events, become members of your organization, and financially support it, and then take their answers seriously. And this is something that we had been talking about over the past 3 years, and I think atheist organizations are starting to get it. But to give you a bonus example, that goes back to what I was talking about before, about that education, the importance of our promoting the ideas of teaching logic and critical thinking and science and whatnot. If education is a major factor in making more atheists, and there's studies and statistics that suggest it does, and making more atheists is your goal, then shouldn't the disparity that often exists in education between white and black neighborhoods be of major concern to the atheist community? This is an example of something that's flown under our radar because we're focusing on science education, critical thinking, and we're just sort of not noticing the fact that there are already huge disparities in these social scenarios that we really should pay attention to and try to figure out a way that maybe we as atheists and an atheist community can do something about. Certainly, if you want more atheists, we're going to have to do that. So the basic idea is, are we as a community of atheists, going to care about stuff like sexism, deception, poverty, crime, corruption, injustice, or only care when it has to do with religion? And I want you to think about this for a minute, that I've run into a lot of atheists who say it's not relevant to them if religion isn't somehow involved in it. And I want you to think about that for a moment. Atheists are only interested in social issues when religion is involved in it. If that doesn't sound weird to you, you haven't thought about it enough. Now, this doesn't mean, however, that organizations like American Atheists or any particular atheist organization has to engage in specific kinds of social or political activism at the institutional level. That's not necessary. Organizations each have their own particular missions. They have their own particular set of goals. They're focused on those things. There are a variety of different organizations have been represented up on this stage already today that each have their own particular mission goals. And that's fine. They can stick with that. But atheist organizations, even those atheist organizations, can at least do certain things that would be helpful. One is to help encourage your members, to get more informed and involved in such issues generally. In other words, what I'm saying is we can promote morally responsible atheism as a general ideal. It's something that we can talk about, something that we can promote in various ways without being specific in any particular issue. Each atheist individually can engage their moral consciousness in different ways, but I think we should be, as organizations, trying to promote this idea of morally responsible atheism. Another is to facilitate members' access to reliable information and discussion about these issues. Now, certain organizations are better equipped to do this than others, but just think about, for example, building online communities where it's easier for atheists to find reliable information that's based on good science on social issues, on maybe gun violence or drugs or anything like that. It doesn't even have to be slanted towards a particular political position, but just the best science, best results, and then facilitate their ability to communicate with each other and talk about these issues. The organization itself doesn't have to take a position or support any particular position, but they can make it easier for their organization, easier for atheists as a community to get better informed about these things, have more reasonable debates about them, more evidence-based debates about them, and facilitate communication among atheists on these issues. And that's the whole idea of an atheist community in and of itself anyway. Another is to sponsor talks from atheist experts in these issues, and all these different kinds of issues, at atheist conferences and meetups. And some of my favorite conferences I've been to have had speakers talk about all kinds of different things. We had one speaker at one conference talk about the neurophysiology of transgenderism and homosexuality. Incredibly fascinating, incredibly important information that atheists as a community can use when they go out into the community and amongst the wider community to debate these issues, even among themselves as well as with the wider society. But you could talk about economics, you could talk about all these different things. You could have experts on all kinds of varieties of issues, educating the atheist community, making the atheist community better informed, and thus better able to do good things as a community. So it doesn't have to be talking about God and the separation of church and state all the time. It doesn't have to be talking about philosophy and Jesus studies all the time. And I have to tell you, I talk about all those things myself. I love talking about all of those things. So I'm not saying we should stop talking about them. In fact, I love hearing about them. I just think our conferences shouldn't be only about those things. I think we can expand some of the slots to have more informative, broader subjects discussed. And then here's another one. Occasionally co-sponsor charitable and educational activities, actions in these issues. They can be small amounts of money spent on these kinds of things, because you know why? When the Coca-Cola company goes into a neighborhood and does some sort of charity drive for a school or something, it's not that the Coca-Cola company actually gives a damn about poverty or anything like that. There's no hand-wringing in the corporate sphere of mission creep, of them losing their way. We should only make Coca-Cola. No, they're smart. They know if they do this, it's good PR. People will see the Coca-Cola industry doing this The Coca-Cola brand gets out there, it gets associated with good feelings and good things, and they ended up in the process of doing something good as well. I think atheist organizations can do more of this, and some have done it. There's an example of the Black Skeptics of Los Angeles have started a charity that helps give scholarships to first college goers within poor families. That way, if they have a child who will be the first member of that family to go to college, they have a special scholarship fund that they're developing for that. And you can look into that and you can still support that cause. But I think this is something that other major organizations could get behind or do things like this around so that this makes press, your name gets in the press, your organization gets noticed, people start noticing that atheist organizations are involved in charity stuff. So it actually promotes atheist values. It shows that you care at least as much as the Coca-Cola Corporation does about community issues. And so this is a good, you can think of the money you spend on this literally as marketing dollars, if you want to be Machiavellian about it. And then the other thing is supporting SIGs, supporting social interest groups. You can do that if you have local chapters. If you're an organization that has local chapters around, you can help them develop these and take advantage of this concept of the special interest group idea. You can also do it if you don't have local chapters. You can do it through, again, through national online forums. You could have, for example, as an atheist organization, part of your website dedicated to having a bunch of guidebooks built by people who've run these SIGs. For people who want to run them. Because oftentimes I go from a community to community and I find that they're reinventing the wheel over and over again. There's a lot of community experience out there making this stuff happen. We could pool and aggregate this experience and make really good handbooks and make it centrally available to atheist groups everywhere. So every local atheist group, every campus group could go, let's say, to the American Atheist website and find this stuff. One organization that's been doing this really well is the Secular Student Alliance. They've been building these kinds of resources for campus groups. But I think we can build similar resources for community groups and other charity activities. So to go back full circle to my first example, use that as an example here, all atheist organizations should publicly and officially denounce the harassment of prominent atheist women. Now this does require really getting informed about what has been going on. So you really know you're informed, you're not a sort of uninformed outsider who's a little clueless. You can actually find out what's going on. And you shouldn't trust any single informant. Like, don't even trust me. You can go find this stuff out yourself, go to the source, know many specific examples of what actually happened, so that you can make a good statement on this that's informed and shows that you're informed and shows that you know what's going on and you're aware of it and disapprove of it. And I think we should all organizations should call for atheists to speak out against and socially punish, meaning denounce, downvote, for example, and things like that. Any harassment behavior, wherever and whenever you can find it. Whenever you have an opportunity to state publicly and make the world aware that atheists, you in particular, are opposed to this, I think we should all be doing that more actively. I would have loved to have seen that Reddit thread where we have like 12 upvotes and 1,000 downvotes on those comments. That's the way our community should be behaving, and I want to see that happen. And the part of that is we have to make it socially expensive and uncomfortable for harassers to continue their harassment. There's often that sort of trope, the idea that you should never feed the trolls, but the reality is trolls will always troll if there's no cost to doing it. If it doesn't cost them anything, they're going to do it because it's fun, they enjoy it. There are people I know of, in my own particular example, I don't get harassed nearly as much as the women I was talking about, not even by a fraction, but I do get a little. And I have full moderation on my blog, so that when they send me a comment on my blog, it does not get seen by anyone, and so therefore I can delete it immediately and they've wasted their time. And yet I still get people trying to say hurtful things to me, knowing full well that no one will ever see it but me. They know that or at least they think that they can hurt me that way, and that gives them satisfaction. If there's no cost to that, if that doesn't cost them anything, if they don't see that there's any massive, widespread social disapproval of that behavior within the community they pretend to be in, they're going to continue doing that. So we have to make it socially expensive and uncomfortable for them to continue doing that, and we have to find ways to make that possible. And that, again, is just for an example. That was just the example I started with, and I'm just revisiting that to show you how all the things I'm talking about tie together. And doing things like that will make your organization more attractive to atheist women and more responsive to their needs and concerns. and thus will attract more women. That's kind of the whole cycle, the goal. And this is the whole concept that we've been promoting over the last 3 years or more. It will also confirm your moral values to the public and thus better represent atheism as a community. And I think this is one of the important elements of this, is that the way you behave, the things you denounce, the things you speak out about, communicate to the wider public, not just the atheist community, what atheists are all about, what atheists stand for, what atheists are against, and what they are for. And ditto for every other issue you can come up with, because this is not the only thing that many atheist women want to talk about or see action on. For example, what about childcare at conferences and meetups? And take note, American Atheists has been at the forefront of being responsive to this concept. For this conference and the last conference, they've had childcare that they've arranged to make it possible for more women, more parents, single parents, men and women, to come to these conferences. We should see more of this. Try to find creative ways to make it happen. I think allying with Camp Quest was a brilliant idea. I think there are a lot of the larger conferences could do that all across the country. Smaller conferences, that probably might not be feasible, but you could still, as your own little local atheist community, you probably got parents that could volunteer to do this. You could probably arrange it in some various ways. So it's something to think about and look for, because if you make it possible, and not just possible, but you make it publicly known, that single moms, single dads, parents, and so forth can come to your local event and have their kid taken care of while they enjoy the event, the learning event or the fun event or whatever it is, you're going to get more people showing up, and you're going to have wider influence, and you're going to grow a stronger community. And then another example just of others I could come up with is, what about correcting misinformation about feminism among atheist men and women? There's a lot of that in the atheist community, where there's people who are a little clueless, don't quite understand what feminism really is versus what anti-feminists say it is. That's an example of something a lot of women would like information disseminated to the atheist public, and that ties into what I was talking about making the atheist community better informed. And this is the sort of thing you could have someone come up here and give you a Feminism 101 seminar, for example. And that's just one example of many different ways that we could do this. And, of course, women aren't the only neglected group. How are you serving the disabled, the blind, the deaf, for example? You've seen the signers who've been interpreting some of the speeches. Those are volunteers. And that applause should go not just for the volunteers who are doing it, but also for American atheists who thought of doing it. And there are other organizations, other conferences who have done that, and it's happening more and more, and so I have warm fuzzies that we're actually, this is something that we were talking about several years ago, and have been pushing for, and it's happening, and I like to see that. But also, what do Hispanic or Black or Filipino atheists want to discuss with the wider atheist community? What issues might they want to get the atheist community to help them with? I want to know. I'm interested. And I have to tell you, when I saw the lineup, the speakers lineup for the American Atheist Convention this year, I was amazed. The most diverse speaking lineup that I've seen in any conference. Having several Black groups represented, several Hispanic groups represented, lots of women speakers. That's amazing. And I want to see that continue. I want to see that become like the norm at conferences everywhere. So I think atheist organizations should take note of this, and many already have. I think American Atheists already gets it. This will grow your membership and financial support. And let me give a little aside on this. I've traveled the country. I've spoken to community groups, atheist community groups, all over the country and in Canada, more than I can count, for many years. And I find in those groups and among friends of those groups and family of those groups, there are more actual and potential atheists who don't join our organizations or go to our meetings because they're bored with constantly hearing about God or religion all the time, or church-state separation all the time, or pseudoscience all the time. Like I said before, those things are fine, we can talk about them, but there are people who don't want to come to the conferences because they became an atheist so they wouldn't have to talk about those things anymore. I know personally family members and friends that I could include in that category who just aren't part of our community and aren't organizing, even though they're atheists and would totally be assets to our community if we brought them in. And those three subjects, again, are fine. I talk about them myself. But it's not all I talk about. It's not even all that I talk about. And it's not what atheists want every speech at every conference and meetup to be about. Again, this conference and others over the past few years are starting to see our point on that, I think. But especially there have been several conferences I've gone to, atheist conferences, that have done this in spades, and I really like that. There are a great many atheists who have other interests that would attract them to conferences and events and motivate them to join and support our organizations. I've spoken to lots of, for example, significant others of organized atheists who would come to meetings and be more active if we were going to talk about social justice issues. I know lots of people who would be here right now if we talked about that more. And so that's an example of where I think there is a market demographic out there that we're not tapping, and we could be tapping it. Most of us, I think it's probably true, I don't know, but most of us want to learn and hear about other issues as well that we, as atheists, could get involved in. Like, for example, economics, or the ethics of future technologies. There's a lot of future technologies that are rolling down the pipe that are going to pose religious and ethical problems. We, as a community, as an atheist community, should be as informed about those things and thinking about those things already. But there are ways that we could better understand economics, and therefore, as a community, be better voters, be smarter atheists, and so forth. Then there's questions like whether we should legalize drugs, or how to reduce gun violence, where there's many competing views on this. Where is the evidence? What does the evidence point to? I, as an atheist, would love to see a good, informed, expert debate by two sides of this issue, by people who really have the facts on hand and really respect logical reasoning, and to see what kind of information I can learn from those things. And I think that would make me a better atheist. And I think we should all agree that it would make us a better atheist community if we were doing those kinds of things. I think we want to see more of that. And we want to hear about such things from experts who can speak from an atheist perspective. And that's important because that means a perspective divorced from religious premises and rooted in the traditions of empiricism, rationality, and skepticism, which you don't always get at other venues and other institutions. We are big on that. We do that really well, which means if we kept doing that on all issues, we could really kick ass as a community. In fact, and I'll just sort of a straw poll in my own past experience, for every organized atheist I know at least one other atheist who would join our organizations and attend our events if only we did things or talked about things they cared about like that. It could be other things too. I went to a conference where there was a woman who gave a lecture on the history of werewolves. I thought that was totally awesome, but anyway. And she even tied it into religious hysteria and atheism anyway, so lots of ways to do that. Far more atheists of all demographics want to talk about how atheists, and as an organized and networked community, would solve social problems or make a difference in the world. What are we as a community going to do? We know what the Christians say they're going to do or trying to do. They often don't actually do it, but nonetheless they claim to be doing it or talk about it a lot. Are we going to talk about it? Are we going to do things like that? Are we going to represent ourselves as a community and so that people recognize that atheists, as atheists, have values and interests and want to solve problems in the world? Or others who want atheists and as an organized and networked community to question other things, like claims being made in the political and moral domain, not just in biology and theology, for example. We all very much depend on philosophy. As atheists, we don't truck with religious dogmas. We root our beliefs usually in some kind of philosophy or worldview. We could do that better. We could be educated on things, make us all, as a community, better philosophers, because philosophy is really our bread and butter. It's part of how we build the worldview that we rely on through reason and evidence. Or there are people who just want to drink or go bowling or knit or march in gay rights rallies, all as atheists with fellow atheists, to socialize and recharge their sanity by enjoying the company of like-minded people. And I think we could definitely do a lot more of that, and it's happening. So basically, those people I'm talking about, you could be appealing to them as an organization. Some organizations already are starting to do that. We can do it more. So that's what I mean. I'm talking about atheism plus humanism plus skepticism, the whole package. And the way to do that is not just to be atheists anymore. Well, let me put it this way. For organized atheists generally, you are organized atheists, you're part of organizations or come to events run by organizations. All of you here, you can tell the atheist organizations you support that you support their doing some or all of the things that I've talked about. If they're already doing them, you can still write to them and say, yes, that was a great idea, keep doing that. Give them feedback, let them know that that's happening. If you want them to do more of these things, talk about it. And together as a community, We can make atheism as a public identity, as an active and organized and networked community, mean something more than just belief in nothing. We can work to make atheists better people, more informed people, more morally conscientious people, and improve the public image of atheism to all other faith communities. And the way to do that is to not just be atheists anymore, but also good humanists and committed skeptics as well, and then work together for a better atheism and a better world. Thank you.